In some ways, tonight's Social Action Shabbat marks the conclusion of a season of social action. For the last 6 months, our congregation has been working on a number of social action issues. From our anti-Semitism series, to the Hunger Walk, to the Interfaith Justice series with our Christian friends, to our Muslim-Jewish dialogue with our friends from the mosque on Steele's Corners, and most recently to Mitzvah Day that many of you participated in. There is an amazing amount of work that goes into these ongoing projects, and it would be appropriate to simply say tonight, thank you. So let's start with that. If you're on the Social Action Committee, can you please stand so we can say thank you? And if you participated in any of these projects, if you could please stand so we can say thank you. You can be seated if you'd like. So that could be it. Social Action Shabbat is planned to look back at these last months, to thank our devoted volunteers, to thank all the people who have helped bring us closer to our interfaith neighbors, to better our city, to inspire our congregation. And this is probably somewhere along the lines of what we were thinking months ago when we looked at July and put Social Action Shabbat on the calendar. Look at what we would be able to look back and celebrate. Tonight, though, can no longer be about simply celebrating the ongoing work we are doing and have always done in this congregation. How could we possibly just look back when we are just days after another mass shooting, this time in Highland Park, Illinois, a neighborhood many of us know personally? The discussion of mental illness and gun violence is fresh on our minds. How could we just look back and pat ourselves on the back for volunteering when that is right before us? How in Akron can we just talk about the last few months when we've come to know the name of Jayland Walker as someone infamous now in our city that has put us into the international news? How can we look back when the question of racial justice, equity in our system is a question about Akron, Ohio? I spoke with a friend, one of the leading black pastors in Akron this week, to ask him how he was doing, how his community is, and perhaps what we could do. He said, "I want people to know that we live in a world where a white man who succeeded at mass murder and terrorized a whole city was handcuffed while a black man who ran from the cops for a traffic violation was shot more than 60 times. We talked and we shared that we know it's more complicated than that. But I think he's asking a valid question. Why such a difference? What's different in our world that these events continue to repeat themselves in such a way? And perhaps he gave a little bit of insight as to what it feels like to be a black man in Akron, Ohio this week or this month. We're not even 6 weeks past the murder of students and teachers at Uvalde on the last day of school. And we're still in the wake of 2 shocking reversals by the Supreme Court, a decision to permit public prayer following a high school football game, and of course, the overturning of Roe v. Wade. So tonight may have been planned as the culmination of a season of social action, but I think it's better to call tonight the beginning of a new year ahead. Tonight, I firmly believe, is as much the beginning of our High Holy Days as any other day on the calendar. And so that's how I hope we treat it. The issues are too important, the world too broken. We cannot wait until Rosh Hashanah in September to talk about our goals for the coming year. We can't wait until our kids return to school to talk about gun violence and school safety. And perhaps we can say we have already waited far too long to talk about reproductive rights, Roe v. Wade and the right for women to make decisions about their bodies and their lives as we understand as Jews. And so, with this last topic, we will begin. I want to start by saying there is a lot to say about the recent decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. There are a lot of reasons to preach about this issue: women's rights, religious rights, the fact that our daughters and wives, like 1 out of every 4 women in our country, have abortions. The fact that there is a massive equity issue among people who have the means to travel and get high-quality health care and those who cannot. I am putting all of those issues aside to try to give what I believe is a purely Jewish voice to this issue. There are 2 main frameworks we use when we look at this issue. I frame them as the legal political and the personal. The legal political framework, we're really familiar with this. This is how we usually talk about it. It asks, who or what does the law protect? It turns to the courts and to lawmakers and politicians to create protections for what the law values, for perhaps we might say what the law prioritizes. Then there's the personal. The personal asks questions about the person, the victim per se, the family, their story. The personal framework wants to know the details. The legal framework just wants to know what the precedent is. The U.S. Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade opens the door for states to answer these questions specifically. The answer to the political question in Ohio, since that's where we live, is that the law protects a fetus after 6 weeks. And likely, we could presume, that'll soon be moved back to conception. That is a legal political framework. In the personal framework, the unique circumstances of a personal story, the decision in Ohio, with a very few limited situations, declares that the individual circumstances don't matter. We know this from the recent 10-year-old rape victim in Ohio who was refused an abortion because she discovered the pregnancy past the 6-week trigger mark. If you value the personal part of the story, then certainly we would say this must be the most extreme of cases, that a 10-year-old would be given the right to have the procedure. But in Ohio, we've said that the personal is not justification for going around the law as it's set. And so she traveled to Indiana. Those are the 2 frameworks. That's where Ohio sits, to the best of my understanding today. So let me try and give Judaism's response to these 2 questions. First, the legal and political framework. Judaism is clear and consistent from as early as the book of Exodus to the statements of medieval rabbis, to the most orthodox leaders in Israel today. The law values the woman over the fetus. In the book of Exodus, it's told in the story of 2 men who, in the midst of fighting, push a pregnant woman, causing a miscarriage. Immediately following the story of that incident, we find out the punishment. Whoever caused the miscarriage is to be fined, but the verse continues, if there's any injury to the woman, the penalty shall be life for life, eye for eye, or tooth for tooth. In other words, while the miscarriage carries the penalty of financial sacrifice, it is nowhere near as severe as causing any damage to the woman. And so, our commentaries have said for a long time that Exodus protects the mother first and protects the fetus second. Perhaps closer to the debate today, there have been a lot of discussion among the rabbis as to how to define a fetus. There's a wide variety of opinions. One explains that the fetus is considered to be like water until the 40th day, what would be the 7th or 8th week by our counting. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, one of the most prominent names in the Talmud, is said to have taught that the fetus should be considered as though it is the thigh of the mother. In other words, like any other body part and not an independent being. If we were to ask at what point the rabbis declared that the fetus is an independent being equal to that of the mother, they're also clear. In the Mishnah, an early rabbinic text, they declare that if a woman is having trouble giving birth and her life is in danger, they must do whatever they can, including ending the pregnancy if it saves the life of the mother, unless the child is more than halfway out of the mother's body. At that time, both the child and the mother are considered equal independent lives, and we cannot trade one life for another. Finally, Rashi, an 11th century thinker, declares that our soul is not complete until a person breathes the air of the world. Until one is considered a soul, we prioritize the life of the mother, who has breathed the air of the earth and therefore is considered a soul. But as soon as the head of a child comes out and takes its first breath, we're not permitted to take one soul for another soul. The two souls are independent beings. Therefore, Jewish law is clear in who it protects and in what priority. In the case of an accidental miscarriage, injury to the mother is valued more than injury to the fetus. In the case of an early pregnancy, the fetus is considered like a body part. The mother is protected. Late in pregnancy, until we breathe on our own, the mother's life is still given priority. And once we breathe and become a soul, the two lives are considered equal. So that is the legal political. What about the personal? Judaism tells us that details matter. In the 18th century, the rabbis ask, even if a married woman becomes pregnant from an adulterous relationship, sometimes you have to wonder where they come up with the examples, but that's a different sermon. Even if a married woman who becomes pregnant from an adulterous relationship and her life is not in jeopardy, she is permitted to abort the pregnancy due to the, in their words, woe and great pain that would be brought upon her and her family. In a more recent ruling, Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein summarizes the reasons that are used in the Talmud why someone might pursue abortion. Among the reasons he mentions, he lists kavod habriot, the dignity of the people involved, shalom bait, holding the peace together among a family, and sa'ar, the pain that one will experience in the future. All of those, according to him and the rabbis, are reasons that a woman could submit for an abortion. So when Judaism debates whether the personal matters, whether the details of your family situation and how you came to be pregnant weigh in on the situation, it seems to me it's quite familiar with a number of very detailed scenarios. And the Judaism's response is the details that impact the life of the mother, the life of the family, the pain that will be experienced, whether that pain is psychological, social, or physical, seem to matter. They are, in Judaism's eyes, valid justification for ending a pregnancy. In the wake of the recent Supreme Court's decision, the state of Ohio has declared that the entity to be protected by the law is a fetus past 6 weeks of conception. Judaism declares the entity to be protected by the law is the mother until the moment the child takes a breath. The state of Ohio has declared that the personal story of a person should not impact the ruling of the court, that a 10-year-old girl raped and impregnated against her will may not abort the pregnancy in the state of Ohio because those details shouldn't be taken into account. Judaism says the details matter. A grown woman who commits adultery can end a pregnancy for the sake of her family's peace, for the sake of dignity, or to avoid future pain. I do not agree with the Ohio law, and I do not agree with all of the Jewish law, which is why Judaism and Jews in America have always been overwhelmingly in favor of the pro-choice ruling. It is not up to the state of Ohio to decide where my moral limitations are. And while I value the wisdom of our tradition as a guide in my life, there are plenty of times I disagree with Judaism. There are plenty of times I adapt it, or even outright reject the direction that has been set by previous generations living at a different time in history. The Jewish community did not come to call America home because we wanted our values to reign supreme over other people. We came to America because we wanted to live in a society where no one religion laid claim to the moral and ethical code we had to live by. the current direction of our country's highest court and leadership, is not disturbing to Jewish Americans because it is in opposition to our tradition or to our personal opinions, at least not Jewishly. We invite debate and dissent. It's disturbing because it excludes our voice. It is disturbing because it leaves no room for dialogue, for details, for debate and differing opinions. It is disturbing because it replaces religious freedom with religious fundamentalism codified into law. I know a lot of people, as you've told me, want to know, well, what are we supposed to do now? It seems that decisions have already been made, and if we're honest, we're exhausted by how many fights we've had. I imagine most of us would say, I know I had the energy, or my parents had the energy, or grandparents had the energy 55, 60 years ago to fight this fight when it was one of the preeminent fights that they needed to have at the moment, but I'm just tired. So, we'll work on that. There are ways to find resilience, and our people have done it many, many times before. In fact, one might say that our entire Torah is a story of people who had to wait a really long, long time and do things over and over and over again in the wilderness with no promise of exactly when it would end or if it would work. And the message continues to be, you keep marching on with the hope that the future turns towards justice, that dialogue, that raising our voices, that talking with people, showing them our perspective, that somehow that leads towards a promised land. Not where one side wins over the other, but where hopefully we all find a way to coexist. But for those who want specifics, there's a list that you were handed on your way in. That list consists of two lists, actually. One that has some things you can do nationally, most of them suggested by the National Council of Jewish Women, and some things you can do locally, most of them suggested by Sarah Yaronka. Sarah, raise your hand. Sarah's been active in this work in Akron, and she's a great, she can be a great guide to you if you want to volunteer and get into this work and help people who are seeking abortions or who want to know more about what their rights and their choices are. Sarah's been on the front lines of this, and she can help you or even help you help those who are helping others. But as for my list is short. It, in fact, just has one thing on it, and that is this. Use your Jewish voice. Use it in personal conversations. Use it at the dinner table. Use it with elected leaders and in our choices for elections. And when I say use your Jewish voice, I don't mean just share your opinion. I mean this is a Jewish issue. Say, as a Jew, this is how I feel, because for us, and there are certainly, as I said at the beginning, other ways to look at this, but from a Jewish perspective, one of the primary issues is one of religious freedom and having a religious voice. And so if we never say those words that are probably very uncomfortable for us, as a Jew, I feel, then no one will know that there is a Jewish opinion that is different and drowned out and unheard in our world. And they will presume, as many do, that all religions agree on this, which they don't. So I hope we claim this conversation as a Jewish conversation, one that started in the book of Exodus and that continues today. Because we're part of this conversation, we cannot wait to be called upon. We have to speak up to be heard. Which is why I think we can't wait. In 3 months, we'll hear the sound of the shofar. And in case over these last 9 months you've forgotten all the metaphors and ways we talk about the high holidays, we talk about the shofar as something that is a call to wake us up. My sense is when we hear it this year, I don't think we're going to be sleeping. How could we? We've been hearing the shofar every week. The sound of loss in a 4th of July parade that woke us up. The loss of equity in our justice system over and over again. It refuses to let us sleep. The loss of innocence in our schools. The loss of religious freedom in our courts. How can we not hear it all the time? May the new year begin today. And may the coming year be a better year. Shabbat Shalom. Page 282, please rise for Aleinu.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, l'tikenu l'liatzer b'reshit, shelo asanu kegoyei harotzut, v'lo zamanu kamishpachot ha'adama, shelo samcha